With me today, Nora Duncan, who is the State Director for AARP.
Well, let me start with telling of just AARP in general, because I think sometimes we have, there's a misperception about what we do. You know, people think we sell insurance, for instance, and we don't sell insurance, but we do. We have products and lines of business that we work with on our for-profit side. Here in Connecticut, we are a nonprofit. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit social mission organization with a membership. Okay. Which sounds like a mouthful, but it actually makes sense. And as we go through, you'll probably see how it works. We have about 610,000 members in Connecticut and about 38 million nationwide. And our role is really to help people age with dignity the way they want to and to be able to live their best lives as they age. So through outreach, through education, through advocacy, we work to accomplish that. And it can show up in your community in a million different ways, which makes us sort of complicated and unique as to some nonprofits. But in terms of our work here with our 600,000 plus members and our team of volunteers, which I'd love to tell you about also, we've got about 150 volunteers in our state office, plus a whole bunch more who do other things, who are in our driver safety program and our tax aid program. But we show up in community. And when I say show up in community, that's a big term or a big way to say it, but there's many ways that we can show up. So we have programs, and I'd say 90% of them are run by our volunteers. So if you called me and said, I have a women's group who'd like to talk about preventing frauds and scams in their community for themselves and their loved ones, would you come in and do a presentation? I would say, absolutely. I have a team of trained volunteers in AARP's Fraud Watch Network who can come out and present what we usually call the con artist's playbook, which is a way for us to educate folks about what to be on the lookout for. You know, we all think we're super smart and we're not going to fall for something, but yet over and over and over again, we see people fall for things because they get put in the right emotional position to fall, and that's what a scam artist does, right? So a scam artist is there working 24 hours a day to get your money out of your hands. That's right. Where you're working 24 hours a day to do all the things you do, right? Which none of which are probably trying to lie, cheat, and steal. So you don't think, you know, you're not on the lookout all the time. But that's our one program we have. There are quite a few. So the fraud and scam prevention, we have program called Disrupt Aging, which is really a movement about looking at aging in a very different way, so that, and in both community groups, in academic settings, and in professional settings, but in businesses, with industry, with trade groups, we're really taking a look and saying, why do we treat aging so much differently than we treat anything else? You know, why is it okay? I always use this example. Why is it okay to say, to give you a birthday card on your 50th that looks like, you know, that has a coffin on it, or some joke about gray hair and wrinkles, when we wouldn't do that with anything else? And there's actually some science behind how you think about aging is going to be indicative of how you age. So if there's positivity, there's a lot more positivity. Yeah. And the list goes on. We do outreach around, you know, how to basically understand all the consumer protections around utilities and not pay more than you have to. We help people navigate the world of unpaid family caregiving. And so that can be, anybody can be a caregiver, you know, at any time. Right. You know, today I might be here with you and I might check my voicemail when I am done and find out that my mother or my aunt had a stroke. And now I am in a world that I was not in when I sat down in this chair. And that is, most people aren't prepared. And so we try to figure out ways to help them. And the list goes on from there. And all of these outreach activities tie back to the mission, you know, to help people age the way they want to age, to live their life the best way they can, to explore their real possibilities. And these things are things we'll do for free. When people call, we organize it the best way we can, utilizing our volunteers, and find a way to bring the programming to all age groups, And even some of the work we do on outreach focuses around educating people on legislation we're trying to pass or that we have passed. So, I mean, if a bill becomes a law and nobody knows it's a law,
right.
What's the point, right?
So right.
There's sort of a couple prongs of our education and outreach program. And then there's just some of the fun stuff, which we like to call it sugar medicine. Right? There's an itty bitty little bit of something to learn, but you might be learning it at the winery and having a free wine tasting, or you might be learning it before you see a free movie screening of the next blockbuster. Okay. There's a lot of ways that we offer our members and non-members alike some pretty significant value. But you have to add a little mission into each of those things. So enjoy your glass of wine, or come out and have a healthy cooking demonstration at a really nice restaurant. We'll be in West Hartford Center, or at a restaurant here in Farmington doing that. So you're enjoying a little bit of a time out on us. But in there we might have a message about you're learning how to cook multi pronged meals that appeal to multiple generations. So if you're a caregiver, here's a way to cook healthy that your kid likes and your mom likes, and do it with a little fun and have a night out, and take our caregiver resources with you, so that when you do have to make the next decision about caregiving, you've got something in your hands that can be a quick reference guide that can get you to the right place and things like that.
So how do people find out about those programs?
So there's a variety of ways. The easiest thing to do on a regular basis is, there's a couple things. So whether you're a member or not a member, it's important to be able to the easiest way I have to communicate with people directly, and the cheapest way I have, is via email. So it's going to aarp.org/CT, and in there you scroll down a little bit and it'll say, I want to hear from the Connecticut State Office. And then I've got your email. The opportunity for me to tell you when there's something happening, within a 20-mile radius of your zip code, for instance, is really the best way to get the first invite to the great free event that sells out. The movie theater only holds so many people, right? The cooking class only holds so many people. The other thing to do is to follow us on social media. We are very active on Facebook and on Twitter, and there's information both around the events, tidbits of things, action alerts about what's going on at the Capitol or the federal government level that we're involved in and taking a position on. There's just some fun stuff. There's interesting videos about what we're up to, or what organizations that we are connected to in some way are up to in the community. It's really kind of an all-inclusive, and that's AARP-CT for both of those handles. Okay. So social media, our website, and the aarp.org/CT, where you can get the emails, also has rich information about blogs and a list of all of our sort of public-facing events, I would say. It's not going to have your woman's book club or whatever that you invited me to on it, because you're inviting me into a private location. Right. But maybe the community center has invited me in, and they say this is open to everyone. So that'll be there.
Wonderful.
And people can reach out to me directly if they are interested in inviting us in on one of the many topics. That is pretty easy. It's nduncan@aarp.org. nduncan@aarp.org, and I'll connect people to the right place, and we can see what we can do. And again, what we do for one, we do for all. We do not say that you have to be a member to go to any of these things. You're not going to get the postcard if you're not a member, right? But you could get the email. There's very few things that we restrict to just members. Some of our local offerings with local nonprofits to get the admission discount, for instance, that will be restricted. But very few things are, and age is not an issue. If I'm going to come in and talk about the retirement savings crisis in this country and in this state, and what we've done on the advocacy front to try to make a dent, I don't want to talk to people who are retired and out of the workforce the same way I want to talk to people who are still going to be planning for their retirement, right? I mean, I'd love to connect with people so they can connect to their children and their grandchildren. But if it's about getting you to understand that there's a new opportunity to save for your retirement, if you don't currently have that opportunity, I want to talk to the person who's 25 and can start saving for their retirement now, so that when they are 75 years old, they have a much different reality than if they didn't start saving now. So, you know, I think recognizing that we're not really age specific, and that anybody can be a caregiver, right? You know, especially think about all the people being raised by their grandparents. You know, so now you're 22 and you're suddenly faced with that thing I just talked about, right? Where mom had a stroke or grandma had a stroke, and you're in that position. And you know, facing something that you know, a lot of people don't face until they're much later in life.
That's so true.
So any age, and we'd love to be invited out to places. So this kind of show is a really great way to get that message to a new audience. Yeah.
Great, great. You mentioned advocacy and working on legislation. Can you tell me a little bit more about some of the hot topics?
Yeah, sure. Well, this year's legislative session went on agonizingly long. Because we did not get a budget until the very, well, if you talk about when the governor signed it, the very beginning, end of October, beginning of November. But we have some buckets of topics that we work in here in Connecticut. They'll fall around the areas of that unpaid family caregiver I talked about, and programs that not only support the person who needs the care, but the caregiver as well. So for instance, the Alzheimer's respite program, that is a budget item. So we have, for quite some time, gone ahead and worked to try to make sure, well, in recent years, we've been working to mitigate cuts a lot more than we've been working on expansion. That's just the reality of the budget situation we have. But that's an example. That's a program that really isn't a lot of money, but that people can sign up for. So if they are caring for someone at home who has Alzheimer's, so in your home, you can get just that little bit of time where you can be sure that your loved one is being cared for, and you can go take care of what you need to take care of. So that can be as simple as, I really need a haircut, to it's not like I'm going away on a week's vacation respite. It's a couple of hours, a half day. Programs such as the Connecticut Home Care Program for Elders. That is a program where when you still have some liquid assets left, you're at a certain level of risk of going into a nursing home, you can come in and get some of those in-home supports at a rate that is a little bit more subsidized. And so that we prevent people going into a nursing home. So if it's getting to a point where the care that needed is so complicated that you need the extra help as the caregiver, and you don't feel like bankrupting someone today by sending them to a nursing home, and we don't want to pay 3 times as much for the care in an institutional setting versus a home setting, this program gets some of that support in the door for you. And again, that's been cut, you know, so many times over the years, and different levels of care have been reduced, and we were able to mitigate that so that the program can continue on. And then there's some programs about actual, like, you know, supporting paid family and medical leave so that people can take the time. So that's one area. We work on consumer protections around utilities. Because people who are low income, particularly seniors who are living on Social Security alone, for instance, they're paying a disproportionate share of their monthly income to utilities, upwards of 33% for some people. And that's just not feasible. And that's not a thing that we can live in. If you're pulling in, you know, $20,000 a year and your heating bill is $500 a month, you know, this is not an option. There are some ways you can make cuts, but some of them create serious safety problems for people. And, you know, we don't want folks having to make those tough decisions. This sounds cliche, but people do make decisions about paying rent, paying utilities, getting medication, and getting food. Those are sort of the things that people can't avoid. I may be able to get the generic peanut butter instead of the brand name, but unfortunately, the generic electricity suppliers, the third-party electricity suppliers, for instance, have proven time and time again that the majority of people do not save when they go into. There's not really a way to get this cheaper energy, and we want to make sure that we're doing the best we can to watch those consumer protections, to fight rate cases. And then we work on retirement savings issues and financial security issues that affect people of all ages, starting from the time you get your first job with a piece of legislation that we're working on implementing now that allows for the 600 or so thousand people in Connecticut right now who are working but don't have access to workplace savings. So when I say that, I am lucky enough to have a retirement account that gets deducted right from my paycheck, right? Set it and forget it. And then I get to go look at my account. I say, what a good job I did. I watch the dollars grow. We hope that the dollars continue to grow. But 600,000 people don't have access to that set it and forget it.
Right.
And a lot of different studies from some pretty reputable places around the country have come up with the same conclusion. And that is that if you have that set it and forget it, you're 15 times more likely to save for your own retirement than if you don't.
Right.
And a lot of those 600,000 people are lower wage. And you know what? You can't walk in and just buy a product from an investment house, right? Now there are some, but this is a scary world for a lot of people who are new to saving for retirement, who are trying to pay the bills all the time. I don't believe that because you're lower income or because you're currently working for a smaller company that doesn't have this offering, that you shouldn't be allowed to save for retirement. So this piece of legislation sets it up so it's payroll deduction. And it's set it and forget it, and we're working on implementation, but that's for people who are in the workforce, not for retirees, right? I want to make sure that people are learning about that when they're early on, so they can save as much as possible, and then we don't need as many programs like the home care program for elders. We don't need as many people on Medicaid. We don't need people having to apply for utilities, help paying their utility bills if they have the dollars that they've saved on their own, right, over time. And so we're trying to make sure that there are these opportunities. It's not going to fix anything for the current generation of retirees, but what if we can help start fixing it for the next generation, the generation after that? And maybe we're looking at a whole different world where it's, there's really not, very few people have pensions anymore. We know that, right? But the different stools, or the legs of the stool that everyone always talks about, more people have that I saved independently leg.
Right, right. One of the things that I was thinking about when you talked about the respite for like Alzheimer's, for example, is that for members only?
Oh no, that's a state program.
That's a state program.
That's anybody who qualifies for the program. All right. Yeah, that has nothing. That's a Connecticut program. Okay. It's not an AARP program. We advocate for that program in the state budget, along with other allies in that world. Okay. So good. Every line item usually has a lobbyist, and some of them are, that's one of our go-tos, because it really does prevent that higher level of care from being needed. If your caregiver burns out and can't keep you at home, what happens? That's right. You end up in a level of care that is just so much more expensive, and that when you're lower income at that point, you use up your resources, and the dollars go to the nursing home, which is fine if it's needed, but if it's not, we don't flip people over to Medicaid as quickly. And the thing with like the Connecticut Home Care Program for elders, when the estate settles later and the house is sold, or the money goes back. Yeah. So it's, and we're able to keep people don't want to, they want to stay home. And home doesn't have to be the home I've always been in, right? I'll give you another example. Okay. So we've worked on legislation that is sort of opt-in for towns, but it allows for something called accessible dwellings. It allows towns to take a stab at, and only to have so far because it's that new. But you get to not have the regular zoning you'd have for if you wanted to build an addition to the house. But there's temporary units you can bring in that are kind of like little pods that drop down. So if your loved one has to sell their house because they can't be there anymore, and maybe you can't fit them inside of your house, or you're trying to have that little bit of space that prevents the family meltdown from happening that we can all think about if we have to move in with our parents, or our parents have to move in with us, or vice versa. There's actually some statute that allows towns to work to allow these kind of little dwellings to be they're temporary structures, right? So we're not going to have to worry that we're going to build a frat house in somebody's backyard, right? But that's another opportunity for people to care for their loved ones in a way that makes sense for them. And I think Stonington was the most recent town to sort of tackle this. But it doesn't force towns to do things. It just sort of opens the path and gives them the opportunity to say, we've got to deal with the fact that we have an aging population, and we're gonna deal with it in a way that makes sense under state statute.
Are you seeing a lot more elderly people being able to stay at home?
I'd like to say we're seeing a lot more, in that we have been able to mitigate some of these severe cuts. There are so many problems with the state budget right now that I don't think the true consequences of so much of what happened I'm able to see that yet, but there are going to be consequences of that state budget on the older there's going to be consequences on everyone, but there are going to be consequences on seniors. I mean, we may have done better than we thought we were going to do with some of these programs, but there is no joy in that budget. And so I think it remains to be seen, but I think also when we're talking about just the state budget, you have to be looking at what these other possibilities are. So accessible dwellings. Am I allowing another route to help keep people from having to go into institutional care, to save those dollars a different way, or to not have to take on an increase. And when we talk about some of the federal health care, I mean, there were some pretty scary proposals about block granting Medicare and Medicaid, for instance, and when you're in that position, the person who needs the dollars the most might not be able to get them, and then it's, what do you do? Well, no one has that answer, which is why we haven't figured out the health care issues. It turns out it's complicated.
It is complicated, isn't it?
It's not as easy as repeal and replace. It's quite complicated.
It is complicated.
Yeah. So we just have to look at a lot of the options that we have and be as creative as possible so that people can stay home. I think the private market has really done a good job in making new services also, though, that help people who have a little bit more means be able to stay home longer and better and more independently. So it's not just what AARP or the state can do. It's also what the private market must do. The private market is going to be driven to the demand. And if there's money to be made, that's great. So there needs to be more innovation. And actually, we do some work at the national level on funding some of those innovative startup ideas and looking at how we serve the market's needs, you can't just keep producing products and services that focus on 24 to 35-year-olds. That's not really who the whole population is.
That's true.
So we try to push innovation there.
That's true. Tell me the importance of voter engagement on the different issues.
Yeah, so we work on legislation, obviously, and the people who are elected to make the final decisions about this are elected by voters. With 600,000 plus members in Connecticut, that's a pretty big block of people that we would like our members to be engaged on issues related to elections, but also the general public. And AARP members actually as a whole vote more than non-members. We have actual data on that, but people over 50 vote more than anyone. So our membership is age 50 and up, and so we think it's not only that we provide a service in doing some voter outreach and education around our issues, but also that it's really an obligation of ours to make sure people have information that is accurate, timely, and gives a true picture of what the opportunities and concerns are in our election cycles. And again, we're nonpartisan, so we're not bipartisan, we're nonpartisan. So we work on issues, and sometimes those issues are voted on in a way that is completely partisan, and sometimes they're not. I mean, I've had 100% yes votes on #1 pieces of legislation, and I've had some votes that went straight down by party line, and then I've had others that are a complete mix-up. But with the 2018 elections, everybody from the General Assembly to all the constitutional officers and every member of Congress except Senator Blumenthal is up for election. That's a pretty big year.
Yes, it is.
So it may not be a presidential election year, but in terms of what it means to people who live here, it's the most important kind of year. And so we want to make sure that we're focusing on key races. The General Assembly right now, the Senate is split 50-50. In terms of Democrats and Republicans. The House is the closest margin it's been in a long time. The governor's race is up for grabs. Elections were a lot closer a couple years ago in our constitutional races than they had been previously. So we'll be engaging candidates. I'm not completely sure what that's going to look like yet, but we'll be engaging candidates as we always do, and we'll be making it that engagement part of our member and non-member voter engagement outreach in a variety of ways.
Great. Well, as we wrap up, I really appreciate, Nora, your being here today.